The boardroom smelled faintly of cedar polish and old cigars, the kind of scent that clung to money long after the room was empty. 12 chairs circled a table the size of a banquet hall, but only 3 were occupied. My father at the head, my older brother Michael at his right, and me on the left, staring at the carved initials in the wood that I had once traced as a child when I'd waited for him after school. Dad didn't look at me when he spoke. He looked at the stack of papers, as if the contract in front of him deserved more respect than his own blood. "You've done good work here, Adam," he said, his tone clipped professional. "But the company's future requires stability. That's why the reins are going to Michael." The words fell with the same weight as a gavel. Michael leaned back, smug but silent. He didn't have to say anything. His smirk did it for him. I swallowed hard, waiting for the punchline. For years I had carried this business in ways no one else had bothered to. I was the one who soothed anxious clients when Dad's temper burned too hot, the one who stayed past midnight revising bids and smoothing contracts. Michael had been the heir in name only, a shadow who showed up late and left early. And now, somehow, he was the one chosen to carry the legacy. I forced my voice steady. "So that's it? After 10 years in the trenches, after keeping this place alive when you—" I cut myself off before the anger could make me reckless. "You're cutting me out?" Dad finally looked at me then, his eyes colder than the polished stone floors. "I'm not cutting you out, Adam. I'm ensuring this company survives. Clients want tradition, not disruption. Michael represents continuity. He hesitated. "You take too many risks." The words sliced deeper than I expected. Risks, that's what he called vision. That's what he called fighting for contracts he thought were impossible, bringing in fresh strategies he never bothered to understand. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I remembered sitting on Dad's knee as a boy, that same clock marking the rhythm of his stories about empire, legacy, and bloodline. Now, its ticking felt like the countdown to my exile. I rose slowly, palms flat on the table. "You want stability? Fine. But don't mistake silence for surrender." Michael chuckled, low and dismissive. Dad didn't even flinch. When I walked out of that boardroom, the cedar and cigar smell clung to my jacket like a curse. I knew then I was no longer a son in his house, no longer an heir in his empire. But beneath the sting of betrayal, another feeling surfaced. Sharp, electric, dangerous. It wasn't grief. It was hunger. And hunger has a way of rewriting the rules of business. The city never looked darker than it did that night, even though the skyline glittered with its usual arrogance. I walked until my feet ached, my reflection trailing me in every glass tower I passed. To them, I was just another suited man moving through the veins of downtown. But inside, something was fracturing, splintering into sharp edges I didn't yet know how to use. I replayed the boardroom scene on loop. The smirk on Michael's face, the way Dad's voice had dropped into that tone he used with employees, not sons. Continuity. That word wouldn't leave me. He wasn't just choosing my brother. He was erasing me. It wasn't the business alone I lost. It was the years. Every late night buried in spreadsheets. Every holiday spent calming angry clients instead of being with friends. Every ounce of sweat I poured into keeping our father's empire afloat, while Michael drifted in on a tide of entitlement. And the worst part? Dad had seen it. He knew. He chose him anyway. Back in my apartment, the silence was merciless. My phone buzzed with a single text from my mother. "Give him time. He'll come around." Sweet words from a woman who had spent her life stitching family wounds with hope, as though hope could replace trust once it had been broken. But hope wasn't what burned inside me. It was something colder, sharper, like standing barefoot on broken glass. I poured a drink, though I barely tasted it, and sat in the dark staring at the city through my window. Somewhere in those skyscrapers sat the accounts, the clients, the deals I had brought in with my own hands. They weren't Michael's. They weren't even Dad's, not really. They had trusted me. That's when the thought flickered. Small at first, then bolder as the hours passed. If he could cut me out of my own bloodline, then maybe blood didn't matter. Maybe loyalty didn't either. Business, after all, was built on trust, not last names. And I still had trust. One name in particular surfaced like a beacon through the fog. Hartwell Industries. Dad's crown jewel client. A multi-billion-dollar account that had anchored the family business for decades. Hartwell had called me personally when their last deal teetered on collapse. I had saved it. Not Michael. Not Dad. Me. The thought grew dangerous roots the more I fed it. What if I reached out? Not with bitterness, not as a wounded son, but as a professional. As the man who had always been there when they needed someone competent. Could I take them? Would they follow? I set my empty glass down, the echo sharp against the counter. The betrayal had already been carved into my chest. But betrayal has two sides. And I realized in that moment, I didn't have to stay the one bleeding. I could be the one holding the knife. The morning after, the city felt different. Not brighter, no, it was still cloaked in its usual haze of exhaust and ambition. But sharper, like every corner had an edge waiting to cut. I hadn't slept, but exhaustion had hardened into something more dangerous. Clarity. I opened my laptop, fingers hovering over the keys, as if the world could end with a single email. And in a way, it could. Hartwell Industries. Just typing the name into the search bar set my pulse hammering. Their latest project, a global logistics overhaul, was bleeding money. The kind of crisis that could topple partnerships and stain reputations. Dad and Michael were already knee-deep in promises they couldn't keep. I knew it because I had been the one who patched holes like that for years. The question wasn't could I take them. It was should I. I sat there, cursor blinking like a dare, when a memory split through the moment. Me, 12 years old, sitting in Dad's office for the first time, watching him command a room full of men twice his age. His voice had been thunder, his presence iron. Business, he'd told me, isn't about blood, it's about leverage. You either hold it, or someone holds it over you. Back then, I had thought he was teaching me strength. Now, I realized he had been warning me. I drafted the email. Simple, professional, direct, offering Hartwell a private meeting to discuss their logistics nightmare. Not as a representative of my father's firm, but as an independent consultant. I reread it twice, my finger trembling above the send button. If they accepted, there would be no going back. No family dinners, no quiet reconciliation, no chance at mending the severed bridge between me and the man who raised me. This wasn't just business, it was war. And then the phone rang. Not Hartwell. My brother. Adam? Michael's voice carried that lazy confidence, the kind he had worn since childhood. Dad says you'll come around, that you just need to cool off. He chuckled. But between us? I'm glad he finally saw it my way. You were never built for this. Too emotional. My hand clenched so hard I nearly cracked the glass of water beside me. Emotional. That was his word for me. The same brother who couldn't balance a ledger, who stumbled through negotiations until I cleaned up his messes. Emotional. I didn't reply. I just let the silence breathe until he got uncomfortable. Then I hung up, and without another thought I pressed send. The email shot into cyberspace, a silent declaration of war. I leaned back, breath caught somewhere between terror and exhilaration. For the first time in my life, I wasn't my father's son. I wasn't my brother's shadow. I was my own man. And as the city roared beneath me, I knew one truth with bone-deep certainty. The moment Hartwell responded, everything would change. Hartwell replied within 24 hours. The message was brief, clinical. Meeting confirmed. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Midtown office. The words stared back at me like a loaded gun. No hesitation, no questions about loyalty, no polite rejection. They were open to listening, which meant they were open to leaving. I should have felt triumph. Instead, the weight of what I'd done began to settle like lead in my chest. This wasn't just rebellion anymore. It was betrayal carved into ink and contracts. That night, I barely touched my dinner. My mother called again, her voice gentle but probing. Adam, your father, he thinks you're hurt. He doesn't understand the depth of it. I wanted to scream that of course he didn't understand. He had never seen me as anything more than an extension of his will. But instead I said nothing. Silence was safer. If she knew the truth, she'd try to stop me, and I couldn't afford hesitation now. Morning came too fast. I dressed like I was going to war. Dark suit, polished shoes, tie knotted with surgical precision. But when I looked in the mirror, the reflection unsettled me. I saw my father's steel in my jawline, his determination in my eyes. The irony was unbearable. At Hartwell's skyscraper, I rode the elevator with men in suits who smelled of power and money. But inside, my stomach twisted. What if I failed? What if they laughed me out of the room and word got back to my father? He'd crush me. And worse, he'd be right. The conference room was glass-walled, 20 stories above the city. Sunlight flooded the table where 2 Hartwell executives waited, expressions unreadable. Adam, one of them greeted, "We were surprised to hear from you, independent of your family's firm." There it was, the line drawn in the sand. I sat down, forcing my voice steady. "I wanted to speak with you directly, because I believe your current project deserves more than promises. It deserves results. And I can give you those results." The room tightened. One of them leaned forward. "Your father's company has represented us for 30 years. Why should we believe you're the one who can do what they can't?" The question hit me harder than expected. My chest burned with an answer I'd been swallowing for years. I took a breath. Because I've been the one doing it all along. The silence that followed was surgical, cutting through every lie, every facade. I laid out numbers, strategies, case studies, my fingerprints on every success they had credited to my father's firm. With each word, my voice grew steadier, louder, truer. But beneath the confidence, something else stirred. A grief I hadn't named yet. This wasn't just about taking Hartwell. It was about admitting what I'd always feared. That my father would never see me, never acknowledge me, unless I stole the proof from under his nose. When the meeting ended, they didn't say yes. They didn't say no. They said, "We'll consider it." Walking out of that tower, I felt the city tilt beneath my feet. I had lit the match. Whether it burned the empire down or burned me alive was no longer in my hands. The storm hit sooner than I expected. 2 days after the Hartwell meeting, I was called back into the same boardroom where my exile had begun. The same leather chairs, the same polished oak table. Except this time, the air felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. My father was waiting at the head of the table. Michael lounged 2 seats down, a glass of scotch in his hand, though it was barely noon. His grin said everything he knew. "You went to Hartwell," my father said without preamble. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried the weight of a verdict. I sat across from him, spine straight. "I went as myself, not as your son, not as your employee." The silence that followed was suffocating. My father leaned forward, his eyes drilling into mine. For the first time, I saw not just disappointment, but a flicker of something darker. "Fear. Do you realize what you've done?" he said. "You jeopardized a relationship I've spent half my life building." "No," I countered, my voice cracking but steadying on the second word. "You jeopardized it by handing the business to someone who can't keep it afloat." My eyes cut to Michael, whose smirk faltered. "I've been saving your legacy for years, Dad." Quietly, invisibly, while he played air. Michael slammed his glass onto the table. "You ungrateful." "Enough." My father's hand silenced him, though his jaw tightened. His gaze locked back onto me. "You think taking Hartwell makes you a man? Makes you better than me?" The words tore something open inside me. "No. It doesn't make me better than you. It makes me free from you." The air cracked. Michael muttered something under his breath, but I barely heard him. My father's stare was the only thing in the room. His silence was heavier than shouting could ever be. For a long moment I thought he might explode. But when he finally spoke, his voice was almost gentle, and that cut deeper than rage ever could. "You're not my son anymore." The world seemed to tilt. My chest hollowed, the words echoing like a hammer against steel. Somewhere deep down, I'd clung to a thread of hope, that maybe this fight could still end in recognition, in reconciliation. But that thread snapped in two. I stood, forcing myself to breathe, forcing myself to meet his eyes. Maybe I never was. The chair legs scraped against the floor as I pushed back. My footsteps echoed down the hall like gunshots, each one severing me further from the life I had known. Outside, the storm had broken. Rain lashed against the glass walls. Thunder rattled the skyline. I walked into it without an umbrella, soaked in seconds. The city blurred around me, but I kept moving, heart pounding with equal parts grief and liberation. I had chosen my war, and in choosing it I had lost my father forever. But as the rain washed over me, I couldn't tell if it felt like ruin or rebirth. Weeks passed. The storm outside had long since broken, but the one inside me refused to quiet. Hartwell called. Their decision was swift and brutal. They were moving their account, away from my father, away from Michael. To me, the deal was inked in less than a week. The headlines came next. Legacy firm loses crown client to founder's son. I should have felt triumphant. I should have raised a glass, bathed in vindication, told myself the years of invisibility were finally over. But victory tasted strangely hollow, like drinking water in a dream, refreshing, but never enough. The office I leased downtown was sleek, modern, alive with the buzz of possibility. My own team, my own name on the glass door. Freedom tangible at last. And yet, each time I walked past the reception sign bearing my name, I thought of the boardroom, the way my father's voice had cracked ever so slightly when he cut me out of his bloodline. One night, long after the staff had gone home, I sat in the dark with the city lights spilling through the windows. The silence was deafening. I remembered being 12 again, perched on the leather chair in his office, absorbing lessons I thought were meant for my future. Leverage, Adam. Business is leverage. I had leverage now, more than I'd ever dreamed. But leverage is a cold substitute for love. The phone buzzed on the desk. A message from my mother. He won't admit it, but he reads every article about you. He's watching. I stared at the words until they blurred. My chest tightened with something between anger and grief. He wouldn't call. He wouldn't congratulate me. He wouldn't admit that I had become exactly what he raised me to be. And maybe that was the final lesson. That some victories carve wounds too deep to heal. I closed the phone, stood, and stepped closer to the window. The city stretched endlessly beneath me, a constellation of ambition and hunger. Somewhere out there, my father sat in his office, nursing his loss, clinging to a legacy he thought he could shape without me. I pressed my hand against the cold glass, as if reaching through to the skyline itself. I had won. I had lost. And perhaps they were the same thing. A single thought settled in me, quiet as snowfall. Freedom isn't the absence of chains. It's learning to live with the scars they leave behind. As the night deepened, I turned away from the window and walked back into the dark office, the sound of my footsteps filling the silence. And in that silence, for the first time, I allowed myself to believe. Not in reconciliation, not in triumph, but in survival. 12.